Visible and audible. Okay, thank you, Omshi. Ashwin, thank you. Jawhar, thanks for your response. So the reason I'm taking the class from home today is because we had a network issue at the center. Thankfully, before I started from home, I got to know that there was a network issue. Once again, it's a stopgap. I know it has happened previously for your class. I'm not very sure if it has happened previously for your class, but it's just a stopgap. It's not a regular thing. Some of you prefer if the class is taken from the classroom. You like the environment better. I understand that. It's just because we ran out of an option. So I can you confirm if the board is visible as well? So whatever I'm writing. Okay, perfect. So may I know what was the last topic that we did? Uh, from what I remember, we finished inflation. It was getting a late, and I remember someone pointing out it is beyond the time. GDP deflation. So that is the last topic in inflation. We have completed inflation. Actually, there is one very tiny bit of information which I think I didn't give you the last time. So you can write it as part of that particular chapter itself. It has nothing to do directly with inflation. Okay? It is just a concept which is used in measurements everywhere. So measurement of inflation also. I'll teach that, and then I'll get to the chapter called as banking. For banking, once again, as with the previous topic, I'll give you a sort of an index. I'll tell you what all we'll be covering, and then we'll get to banking. Okay. So is there someone who's going to come on video? The usual participants. Jawahar is here. Maybe one more person. So I'm yet to get any response from this. All right. So thank you, Jawahar, for coming on the video. I'll start with the class. I'll start with the topic. Just write it as one of the extra topics inside inflation itself, but it is applicable everywhere, wherever you read about economics, wherever you read the newspaper. The concept called as basis points. Concept called as basis points. Frequently, when we read newspapers, we might come across, especially once in 2 months, when the Reserve Bank of India, I would have told you about the Monetary Policy Committee in the last class. So when they make announcements with respect to certain rates that they have, like repo rate, they make announcements that the repo rate has been increased by uh, 50 basis points. This is something that we tend to see in the news. So what is this basis points? What do we mean by 50 basis points? And so that is what we are trying to understand. So for that, I need you to give me an answer to a question. I'm going to ask and answer. So when we say the price of a product, let's say we take a pen, the price of a pen has increased from rupees 10 to rupees 20. Okay. What is the increase in the price of the pen? By how much is the price of the pen increasing? This is a very straightforward question. By how much is the price of the pen increasing? I want with the unit. I want with the unit. Don't just give me a number. By how much is the okay? Yeah. So Shivapriya has an answer. Shivapriya says it is increasing by rupees 10. Okay. Ashwin has also given me an answer. Murali ji has also given me an answer. Yes. Vamshi, correct. It is increasing by rupees 10. Next question is, by what percentage is there an increase in the price of the pen? By what percentage is the price of the pen increasing? Rini, yes, correct. So some people are making a mistake with respect to the percentage calculation. So let me clarify it for you how the percentage is calculated. Some people are saying 50 percentage, some people are saying 200 percentage. I'll tell you how the percentage is calculated. This is not a mathematics class. This is not where you are supposed to learn this, but I'll still teach you. Whenever you have a new value and an old value, and you have to calculate the change, percentage change. This is exactly what we already did as the calculation of inflation. What did we say is the formula for calculating inflation? Present value minus past value divided by past value. What are we trying to do? Past value is here, present value is here. By what percentage has that increased? That is exactly the formula here also. Which is why I told you inflation formula is not any big formula, new formula. It is just the formula for calculating percentage of increase. So here also you will say 20 minus 10, new price minus old price, divided by, we are trying to find out on the old price, how much is the increase happening. So an increase of 10 rupees, which is this, what is it as a percentage of the old price? That is what is we mean by percentage increase. There is always an into 100 because we are talking in percentages. So into 100 is equal to 100 percentage. For this to be 50 percentage, it should have been 5 rupee increase. Now think logically, the price of a pen is 10, the new price is 10. So 10 rupee, it is increasing by another 10 rupees, which means entire value of the pen is becoming one more time, is added one more time, which is 100 percentage increase. I understand why some of you are thinking 200. I understand why some of you are thinking 550. But let us get the logic clear. This is how percentage is calculated. So 100 percentage increase. So I ask you the same question in different ways. You can answer. I ask you 10 rupees is increasing to 15 rupees. What is the percentage increase? Rupee increase, you will say rupees 5. Percentage increase, you will say 50 percentage. Correct. Now similarly, even if I ask you rupees 12 is increasing to rupees 13. Okay. How much is the percentage increase? You cannot readily calculate and tell. Why? Because the formula is 1 divided by 12 into 100. It is not as easy as 1 divided by 10 into 100 or 10 divided by 10 into 100. So, which is why we don't always talk in percentage terms. We always say the price is increasing by rupees 1. That is the easiest way to talk about it. So why do see if this is the easy way, then why don't we always talk about it? Why do we talk about percentages? Because there is another concept which you have to take into consideration. Okay, what is this other concept? Now let us say we are talking about a pen. Okay, we are talking about a pen. Rupees 10 of a pen increasing to rupees 20 is a significant change. You are spending 1 rupees on a 10 rupees on a pen. Now you have to pay 20 rupees. It is a big change. Double the price you are having to pay. Correct? And pen is something that you buy at regular intervals. If you are a student, you tend to buy pen on a regular interval, or a pencil on a regular interval, or a notebook on regular intervals. So when the price increases by 10 rupees, it is substantial. 10 rupees itself may not be substantial for you, but 10 rupees increasing every time is a substantial increase. Now assume this car, we are buying a car. The price of car is, let's say, 5 lakh rupees. The price of the car has increased to rupees 5 lakh. Let me tell you the rupees 5 lakh 10. The price of the car is increasing by rupees 10. So here also you are saying increases by rupees 10. Here also you say increases by rupees 10. Now, do these mean the same thing? No, obviously these don't mean the same thing, because car in the larger scheme of things in 5 lakh rupees, 10 rupees is nothing. Okay. So to understand what that increase means to the people, what that increase means to the people is why we need to compare it with the old price and give. That is why we talk about percentages. This is why we calculate percentage. Here, what is the increase? We say it is 100 percentage increase. Here, it is not even a 1 percentage increase. It is far lesser than that. I'm not going to calculate it. So if you were to calculate, it will be 10 divided by 5 lakh to 100. Whatever you get as the value here, that is the actual value. 1 divided by what? 500. 1 by 500 percentage is the increase. So it is such a small impact. So to understand the impact of that change is why we calculate percentages. Otherwise, you can always talk about it in terms of purely the actual number itself. Okay? So now what I have told you is the importance of understanding something as just the pure increase in that number versus understanding it as an increase in percentage. Now, let me ask you another question. Okay, again a mathematical question. Let me clarify, this is not a mathematics class. This is just to convey a particular economics point. Okay? Don't get very worried that I'm teaching you mathematics here. Now consider this. The price of pen was something, okay, some percentage. There is some percentage, 10%. You are spending, let's say, let's consider this. You are spending 10% of your money on food. Let's assume. Now, last month. This month, you're having to spend 20% of your money on food. So there is an increase from 10% to 20%. Your expenditure on food as a percentage. Percentage is always of something. Percentage of something. Okay. So you were spending 10% of your income on food. Now you are having to spend 10%, 20% of your income on food. My question is, what is the increase? And what is the percentage increase? What is the increase and what is the percentage increase? Are they the same or are they different? What is the increase and what is the percentage increase? Both are same 10%. Rini saying 10%. Increase can be calculated. Percentage increase is 10%. Increase of 10% of whole income. Increase is 100%. Percentage increase. It's the other way. Okay. So now none of you have actually got the answer right. There is an increase. There is a percentage increase also. There is a difficulty with calculating the increase. I understand that. Correct. This person without name. Who is this? 2034875. You haven't added your name. If you would add your name, I could mention. Mageshwar, please add your name. Okay. Sri Lakshmi, not quite. So I'll tell you how this works. Here, how much is the increase? You simply look at the difference. So whenever you say increase, you say new value minus old value. 20 minus 10 is equal to 10. Okay. So 10 is the increase, but it is not an increase of 10%. Why? Because we know what is the concept of percentage. In the concept of percentage, we'll say 20 minus 10 divided by 10 into 100, which will be 100% for us. So percentage increase is 100%, because percentage is after all a unit in this case. It's just like rupees. It is only a unit. Okay. So there is an increase in percentage of 100%, but the increase of value is what we call as 10 percentage points, because percentage itself is what we are measuring again. Here, simple increase in the number, we are referring to it as percentage points. Okay, so 11% increasing to 12% is an increase of 1 percentage point. There is a concept called as percentage point for this very purpose. There is something called as percentage, which is calculated only in this formula. New value minus old value divided by old value into 100. Even if you are calculating percentage of percentages, you have to follow the same formula. And you will arrive at an increase of 100%, 10% increasing to. So if you are, now think of it from a conversion perspective, you were spending 100 rupees on food. Now you are spending 200 rupees out of an income of 1,000. Okay, out of an income of 1,000, you are spending 100 rupees. Now you are spending 200 rupees. What is the percentage increase? The percentage increase is 100%, right? So the same should apply here also. right? If this is 100% increase in the amount that you're spending, here also it has to be a 100% increase. How can it be anything else here? But in order to measure, normally it is difficult to measure what is the increase in just percentage from one to the other, because by default, that is the unit itself. So what we do, we are creating a new concept where the calculation of percentage still remains the same. New value minus old value divided by old value into 100. But we still want to calculate like how we calculate the difference in rupees. So difference in the new percentage to the old percentage, only the difference that we refer to by the name percentage points. Okay. So if a value increases from 60 percentage to 64 percentage, we say there is an increase of 4 percentage points. Not 4 percentage, but 4 percentage points. If you want to know how much is the percentage increase, you still have to do 4 divided by 60 into 100. That will give you the value of percentage increase. Okay. I hope this concept is clear. Don't fight against this concept. Accept this concept as the reality. Don't think that, oh, this goes against my logic. This is just this is how it is. Maybe you were unaware of the logic. Okay. So this is the concept of percentage points. Now coming to the concept of basis points. What is it that is basis points? Now we say the price of a pen was 10 rupee 50 paise. Let's say rupees 10.50. It increases to rupees 10.75. Okay. There is one way in which you can say the price has increased by rupees 0.25. Or you might say the price has increased by 25 paise. Right? So you can either say the price has increased by, now I'm not talking about percentage change here, I'm talking about purely the whole number, the difference. You can say the price has increased by 0.25 rupees, or you can say it has increased by 25 paise. These are just two units where 1 rupee is equal to 100 paise. We all know this. Okay. We have this concept in many places, centimeter per meter, everything, wherever you can resolve it. This concept exists. Similarly, in percentages also we have 1 percentage point is equal to 100 basis points. So basis points is nothing but a whole number depiction of, or a natural number depiction of the decimal units. Is a natural number depiction of decimal units. Your percentage, especially something like repo rate, let's say repo rate is 6.25 percentage. What we say is that there is an increase in repo. You can either say there is an increase in repo of 0.25 percentage points, or more conveniently, you can say there is an increase of 25 basis points. Then why are we not calculating percentage here? Because everyone knows the context of repo rate, and so the percentage increase is not relevant. The percentage increase is not as relevant. So that is why we look at the actual number increase, and the actual number increase, because it is in percentage, we have to use percentage points, and because it is smaller than a percentage, we use the term basis points. I hope this is clear. This is the concept of basis points. When you read a newspaper saying the banks have reduced the interest rates by 20 basis points, 35 basis points, you need to understand, previously if the interest rate of borrowing was 11.6 percentage, and if they have reduced the interest rate of loans by 30 basis points, their current interest rate will be 11.3%. They have decreased. If they have decreased it by 30 basis points, it will be 11.3%. Okay. I hope this is clear to everyone. One concept I had missed out on mentioning as part of the last class, we were already running late. Move on to the next concept. We'll move on to the next chapter itself. Okay. The heading is Banking in India. already in the chapter called as money, we have gone through a little bit of banking, the functions of banks and the various deposits and all those. We have gone through that. The chapter called as money, and we covered money after public finance. So we will not be going into the technicalities of a bank or the functions of a bank and all those. We are already done with that. What we'll be focusing on this chapter is primarily in India, how has the banking system evolved over a period of time? What are the issues which have faced the Indian bank in the past? What are and how they were resolved? What are the issues that are facing the Indian banking system in the present? And what are our efforts towards overcoming those issues and certain other terminologies. This is what is our crux of this class. I'll tell you the various headings inside it. First one, we have something called as chronology of banking in India. So we have within this, we have a phase prior to independence. Prior to independence. Then, in the post-independence, we have phases like nationalization of banks and whatever we have to learn under nationalization. So the schemes that were implemented as part of nationalization of banks, so the schemes about which you have heard even recently, like priority sector lending, lead bank scheme, and those we'll be learning about those here. And as a part of this, there was a change that happened in 1991. There was a liberalization in the economy that happened. As a result of that, there were some recommendations, there were some reforms in the banking system. So reforms in the system. Then we will stop going by chronology and then we'll directly dive into our most important topic, non-performing, non-performing assets. We'll learn about what are non-performing assets, definition, so that I'll put under the heading of introduction of non-performing assets. Then we learn about classification of non-performing assets. How are they classified? What are they classified into? So we'll be talking about that. Then Indian story. How did NPS come about in India? So Indian experience. How did we get into this story? Then, most importantly, resolution mechanisms. Then we talk about international norms of banking. Where we talk about something called as capital adequacy ratio. And then finally, we have terms related, random terms related. So this is the order in which we'll be doing. Right? So someone is sending a message saying, "Sir, please explain insolvency and bankruptcy code at the end of the class, sir. Please, sir." I don't see the reason for pleading so much. It is part of the class syllabus itself. Don't worry. So when I say resolution mechanisms, it will include your insolvency and bankruptcy code and all those. Don't worry. Thanks for the suggestion, Shivapriya. But as I always say, wait till the end of the class. You will get to know a lot of things which you want to know, which you are eager to know. We will cover it in class. Anyway, so let's get to the class. Let's get to the topics. So when you talk about chronology of banking, so I'll that's the first heading. I'll not spend a lot of time explaining. It is just your facts. 1806 is when the first, not the first, the most important bank which was set up in India. The first most important bank which was set up in India. When I say most important, notice this: all the banks that we are learning about in this chronology are banks which are in existence even today. There might have been a lot of banks which were set up in the 1700s, late 1700s, which were set up, which were later closed, which were not successful. Okay, so we are not learning about all those things. I am not for a moment saying that 1806 was the first time a bank was set up in India. In fact, the concept of banking in India has existed from the time of Indus Valley civilization, where we had all these merchant guilds that were there. We have experiences of a sort of banking system in the Lothal area in Gujarat. We learn about it in the ancient history. We learn about the Manigramams in the Sangam era. So those are all various examples of banking system in the past. But banking system in the past was a system where the business people, because they wanted money, they said we will accept your money, we'll use it for our investment purposes, and then we'll give you an assured return, some sort of a interest return. So what happened was that there was bank was not acting as a financial intermediary. Bank in that sense was just a collection of people coming and depositing money, which the bank itself is a business, so the bank would use it for its own business. So that is the old definition of banking. There is a very high risk involved with depositing money in such banks because they are using it ultimately for business purposes. But the modern definition of banking, where bank is only acting as an intermediary, where they cannot use the money for their own purpose, that banking system in India started somewhere in the late 1700s with the arrival and the establishment of dominance of the British commercial entity, the East India Company. That is when this modern definition of banking started taking shape in India. Okay, that is where we talk about the first major bank to be set up, which is still in existence, the Bank of Bengal. The interesting part is that when it was set up in Bank of Calcutta in 1809, it changed name to Bank of Bengal. I'm retaining it as Bank of Bengal. These sort of nitty-gritties I don't think is relevant from an exam perspective. Then in 1840, we have, of course, if you think of the Britishers, if there is a bank in Bengal, you have to think of the other two places where the bank would be there. There would be a bank in Bombay and Madras as well. These were the three presidencies of that time. So we have a Bank of Bombay, which was set up in 1840. And we have a Bank of Madras, which was set up in 1843. Bank of Madras. These three, as I just revealed, are also called as the presidency banks. Please note, British economy, not a government-led economy. It was a private-led economy. It is a capitalist economy, not a socialist one. So these banks are not set up by government. These are set up by private companies, maybe East India Company. They are the ones who set up, or some businessmen come and set up this. Okay. So that is what happened. So these were all British-owned banks in three different places. Communication of that time, imagine that there wouldn't be a lot of branching concept. There wouldn't be a branching concept. There would only be one bank. That's all. One building, one bank. That is all that they have. Anyone who has to access this bank has to come all the way to wherever the bank is located. Otherwise, there would be no communication between this bank and the branch because of the difficulty of communication. Right? So these were the three banks. Now, as a result of these being British banks, mostly it is the Britishers who used to get loan. So to counter that, another trading hub of that period in 1865, we have in the Allahabad region a bank being set up by Indians, Allahabad Bank. In 1895, we have another bank as the Punjab National Bank, another trading hub. These were the centers of a lot of business activities during those times. That is why you will find that there are banks in these areas. There were numerous other Indians who tried to set up banks. Some of them succeeded for a while. Some of them failed in the beginning itself. We are not talking about those because these are the significant banks. These exist even today. All five banks that I have mentioned are in existence even today. You wonder where is the Bank of Bengal, Bombay, and Madras? You will understand. Because in the period of 1921, the next major event that we can talk about is that when India was consolidating into a bigger economy, into a global economy, where India was participating in world activities and all those, So what was felt was that there was the need felt for a pan India sort of a bank which has a presence across India. So what they did is that it is generally impossible to set up a big company to begin with. You can set up a small company, it will grow into big. So you cannot one fine day set up a big bank. You have to set up a bank and it has to grow into a big bank, because ultimately people are the ones who open accounts with a bank. If people don't trust a bank, why would they open the account? So just because a big bank is set up, people won't come and open their accounts. So you can only create a big bank by combining existing banks. These three banks were combined together to form the Imperial Bank of India. 1935, next major event, there was a need, there were too many banks which were coming up. There was a need felt for regulation of these banks. Why? Otherwise, the Imperial Bank itself was acting as a regulator because it was the single biggest bank. Think of it. I am a big business person. I am making rules for everyone. Obviously, I'll make rules which favor me. So that could happen. So they felt the need for a neutral entity to regulate all of them. 1935, you can make the link. RBI Act of 1934, Reserve Bank of India was set up once again as a private body because it was a capitalist economy. Government had a small share in it, but it was not a government-owned bank, government-owned regulator. It was a private regulator of the banking system where government had a stake in it. That's all. The next event I'm going to talk about is not with respect to banking per se, but in general, independence. India got independence in 1947. What that resulted in is we can take a look at the analysis of how the banking system was at that point of time. You'd be surprised to know that there were about 500 odd banks in India, 500, 550 odd banks in India. We talk of the banking system as a weak system at that point of time, weak banking system. But still, we had 500 odd banks. Now, if you think of the logic behind, there were 500 odd princely states which were there at the time of independence. You are aware of that, I assume. 500 odd princely states were there. Now, if there were so many princely states, is it not logical to assume that every princely state would at least want to have a bank of its own? If you think along those lines, 500 banks won't surprise you a lot. So that was the system there. 500 odd banks which were there, but the problem was that these banks were all very weak. So during the time of independence, weak banking system. Now, what do we mean by weak banking system? Weak banking system means the functioning of the banking system, the structure or the foundation of the banking system is weak. So what do we mean by foundation of a bank? A bank is founded or it is established or it runs on the basis of the people who are depositing the money and the people who are borrowing money from it. And if you look at that time, although there were 500 odd banks, almost all of them were centered in urban areas alone, exclusively in urban trading areas. Why? Because that is where the business people are there. That is where they feel they can get their deposits from. And we already know from reading about the Indian history, um, 70 to 80 percentage of Indians lived in rural areas. Very small percentage lived in urban areas at the time of independence. So Indian banking system was catering only to the minority which were living in urban areas, which explains why we consider the Indian banking system to be weak, because their source of money was very, very limited. And a rural person is not going to just simply travel all the way to an urban place just to deposit money, especially when there is no branch. Why? Because to get that money back, the person has to travel all the way here. So it is not likely to happen. So these were the challenges facing the Indian banking system. Banking was only supposed to be an activity which is kept aside for a few people were the only ones who could access a bank. That is the logic that was there at that point of time. The poor people, the rural rich, even the rural rich, they had absolutely no access to the banks. The urban poor had no access to banks. So banking was a very, very limited and restricted activity, which is why we call banking as a weak banking system. If someone asks you a historical perspective of banking, you can make this conclusion. Then the first major initiative done by the government after getting independence is in 1949, when Reserve Bank of India was taken over by the government. RBI came under or brought under government control. Government ownership. Even today, RBI is a corporate body. You can think of it as a corporate body, which is owned by the government of India. 100% of RBI is owned by the government of India. But even though it is owned by the government of India, it is almost independent in its functioning. Under normal circumstances, RBI is an independent body. It is not dependent on the government. The government does not decide what the RBI has to do. RBI itself decides, the RBI governor decides what is to be done. But the slight point to note here is that RBI governor decides what RBI will do, but government decides who RBI governor will be. Government is the one, because it is the owner of RBI, it appoints the RBI governor, which is why we had the whole issue of Urjit Patel. Urjit Patel was promoted to be the governor of RBI after Raghuram Rajan left. So Urjit Patel was not quite happy with the interference that was happening from a government's perspective. So he resigned, and ultimately government appointed an IAS officer as an RBI governor, who we have right now. Shaktikanta Das. I am not undermining the capabilities of any governor, because in the past we have had IAS officers who have been excellent RBI governors. I am not criticizing the government or the current RBI governor. I'm just saying this is how the structure is. There is no necessity that an economist from a famous business school alone has to be an RBI governor. Anyone who understands economics and governance aspect, they are the ideal people for being the RBI governor. Okay? So I'm just saying the structure. This is how the structure works. But 1949 is when RBI was brought under the government's ownership. Okay? There is one particular schedule there. I think it is called Schedule 7. I'm not very sure about the schedule. Under that schedule, so that schedule has not been used yet in India. If the government decides to use that schedule in case of financial emergencies, and you already know probably from polity class that India has not had a single instance of financial emergency so far. We have had other types of emergency, two other types of national emergency and your president's rule. Both we have had, but financial emergency alone we have not had. Okay, so what the financial emergency will say is that it can impose a particular uh, schedule is there. I'll tell you the name of the schedule. I'll refer to it and I'll get back to you about that. As per that schedule, the government under such circumstances can take over the control of RBI and can govern the RBI and do the functions of RBI. Those are exceptional functions of Reserve government over the control of government over the Reserve Bank of India. It has not been used till date. Just giving you an information. Anyway, I'll tell you about that schedule later. I'll find the exact number and I'll tell you later. Next major event in the Indian banking system is 1955. India, see, we had a 5-year plan to begin with. 1952 to 1956, we had a 5-year plan. The 5-year plan focused on agriculture. If you have read the Indian economic development book, like I had asked you to, you would already know this entire story here. So first 5-year plan focused on agriculture because most of India were dependent on agriculture. India's agriculture was in a poor state after the World War and all these fights and independence struggle and all this. So we decided to focus on the agriculture and make India food sufficient, self-sufficient with respect to food. We were on the track of doing that. So it was a successful plan, the first 5-year plan. But somewhere along the line, during the first 5-year plan, we realized that the administrators of India realized that we cannot become a major economic power or we cannot grow economically if we do not focus on other sectors, the secondary sector, because secondary sector has the potential to employ a lot of people, has the potential to take the income levels of the Indians much higher. So the second 5-year plan focused on industry, wanted to focus on industry, and we decided that at that moment, India did not have the ability to set up a lot of small industries. So we decided to set up big industries. The government, through its investment, would set up big industries, and those big industries, their demand, the demand for raw material, would lead to the setting up of slightly smaller industries, and those industries demand will lead to a setting up of even smaller industries and so on. This is called as the trickle down theory. We use the trickle down theory and we said we'll set up really big industries and smaller industries will automatically be set up to cater to their demands. To set up a big industry, what was required was huge investment. At that time, where will we get the investment from? It has to come from some bank. Where will the bank be? The biggest bank at that point of time is the Imperial Bank of India. So India, the government took over again the ownership of Imperial Bank of India and renamed it as State Bank of India. So this is how SBI was formed. State Bank of India formed from Imperial Bank of India and brought under government ownership. And brought under government ownership. Okay. So that is 1955. 1959 to when the reorganization of the states had started 1956, we started reorganizing all the states, and finally there were some set of banks which were from these princely states which had a lot of wealth with them. Okay? You think of Mysore, princely state, coming and joining as part of India, Hyderabad coming and joining as part of India, Travancore coming and joining as part of India. These were areas which were confused whether to join India or not, and later decided to join India. Saurashtra, Jaipur, Bikaner, all these had their own banks. All these princely states had their own banks, and they became associate banks under SBI. They were independent in some sense, but they were overall managed by the State Bank of India. So we had the State Bank of Travancore, State Bank of Mysore, State Bank of Hyderabad, State Bank of Saurashtra, State Bank of Jaipur, Bikaner, all this. So these were called as the associate banks of State Bank of India. So princely banks, princely state banks made as associate banks, associates of SBA. So 1959, we are almost on the verge of finishing this chronology, but now is when we are going to learn about the single biggest thing that has happened to the banking system so far in independent India. 1969 is when something called as nationalization of banks. Nationalization of banks. It happened in two phases. So 1969 was phase one, 1980 was phase two. 14 of the biggest banks at that time were nationalized as part of phase one, and 6 of the remaining big banks at that time was nationalized in phase two. First, we need to understand what is the logic behind nationalization. Why did the government decide to do something called as nationalization? So first, let us understand what is nationalization. Nationalization is a process by which a privately owned body is taken over by the government, brought under the ownership of a government. Okay. So in that sense, going by that sense, what happened to the Reserve Bank of India in 1949 and what happened to the State Bank of India in say 1955 and the associates in 1959, all of those should be classified as nationalization. They are nationalization, but we will not call them as nationalization because what we refer to as nationalized banks today, when we say some banks are nationalized, so what we mean is that there is a particular act called as Act towards the nationalization of the banks, or there were acts to nationalize, say, airways. Tata's had an airway that was converted into Air India. Iron and steel companies were uh, taken over by the Government of India. Steel Authority of India Limited, Coal India Limited, all these were once upon a time private companies, which the government took over the ownership of. So all those, if they were done under a particular scheme or a particular act towards that nationalization, only those we'll call as nationalized bodies. Even if in the case of SBI and RBI also it was nationalization. We do not refer to RBI as a nationalized bank or a nationalized body. We do not refer to SBI as a nationalized bank. Why? SBI was set up under something called as an SBI Act itself. Okay? There is a separate act called as SBI Act. Not a lot of banks have a separate act for. I don't think there is any other bank in India which has an act of its own. But SBI has an act of its own for being set up. The other banks in India, like what we have is the Punjab National Bank and Allahabad Bank, and various other banks that are there. Those banks were nationalized, were under this particular scheme in 1916 until 1969. They were all private banks. The Punjab National Bank and any other bank that you can think of as a nationalized bank. Indian Bank, Allahabad Bank, all these were private banks, which were later taken over or nationalized by the Government of India. So what is nationalization? You can write as a definition. Change in ownership from private hands to government hands is what is called as nationalization. Change of ownership from private hands to government hands is what we refer to as nationalization. So there is another concept. We call certain banks to be public sector banks. So what are public sector banks? Are nationalized banks and public sector banks one and the same? There is a difference. A lot of public sector banks are nationalized. All nationalized banks are public sector banks, but not all public sector banks are nationalized banks. For a bank to be called nationalized, first of all, today it is under government ownership, but in the past it should have been under private ownership. So there must have been a change. There must have been a process by which ownership has changed. Only then we call it as a nationalized bank. A bank which was once upon a time private is now under government ownership. That is a nationalized bank. What is a public sector bank? A bank which is owned by the government is a public sector bank. Now, I'll give you an example of a bank which is a public sector bank, but not a nationalized bank. A bank which is set up by the government itself. Government itself sets up a bank. Let's say there was something called as Bharatiya Mahila Bank. That bank was set up by the government itself. There's a bank called as IDBI. Bank itself was set up by the government of India with its own money. Those are public sector banks. Those are not nationalized banks. And as I already told you, State Bank of India was set up under a separate act called as State Bank of India Act. They were not brought under government ownership as a result of the nationalization acts that were there. So SBI is also another bank, which is a public sector bank, which is not considered as a nationalized bank. All right. So I've given you the understanding of what is nationalization. Now, so what is nationalization? We have answered. Now we try to answer the question, why nationalization? Simple answer is, we had our first 5-year plan from 52 to 56. That was a success. Second and third 5-year plans where we decided to set up huge industries and take India forward. Think of it logically. You would know if it was a success, we wouldn't be a service sector-led economy currently. We wouldn't have had to go through a lot of troubles that we went through. That did not quite work out. Okay, and that was from 56 to 57 to 61, second 5-year plan. And around that time, we had the China war, 61, 62. And then in 65, we had a Pakistan war. And then 66, 67, 68, that period, we had three continuous years of famine, right? After all this war, so when we had the China war, India realized that, okay, we are not surrounded by friendly neighbors. It is not only Pakistan which is trying to create a struggle. There are other entities also which are adversarial to us. And we were at a stage where we were thinking, oh, what Indochina buy. That was the attitude that we had, and they attacked us. Okay, so that was a major issue for us, and we decided that we have to spend more on defense also. So our spending towards other things compromised, and defense also we started spending a lot. This followed by a Pakistan war and followed by 3 years of famine, when that meant that the food security that we had achieved through our first 5-year plan was completely wiped out, and we were dependent on USA for importing free wheat. They were just giving us free wheat under a public legislation scheme of theirs, and our we became dependent on them for our food needs. We were not. It put our sovereignty under question. It put our independence under question in a way. So we decided in the late 1960s, in the towards the beginning of the 1970s, that we cannot be like this anymore. That we need to first become self-sufficient with respect to our food needs. That is where we decided the concept that we'll encourage certain kinds of seeds and increase the productivity. Thankfully for us, in the 1960s, there was a Mexican scientist called as Norman Borlaug, who came up with ideas of high yield variety seeds. With little effort, with the same effort, we were able to produce more. Okay, so we decided to our agricultural institutes, MS Swaminathan, he took up that concept and decided to implement in India. That is where we realized that we had to focus on agriculture, and we had to bring in a green revolution into India. The idea of green revolution germinated in the late 1960s. But green revolution, which was the success of which dependent on high yield variety seeds. These were the basis of that green revolution idea, because these were the extremely productive seeds that were there. So these seeds were not naturally available. The farmers had to buy these seeds, okay, which meant that the seeds were costly. Previously, a farmer did not have to spend to buy seeds. He had seeds from the previous sowing season. There would be seeds which would be available for further sowing. But that is not the case anymore. The farmer had to pay money to buy these seeds. And because these were high yield variety seeds, because these were plants which were made in laboratories, there were some compromises made. To increase productivity, there were some compromises made. What were the compromises? These were very prone to pest attacks and required pesticides to be sprayed on them. In addition to that, to give certain nutrients which were not naturally available in the Indian soil, it required fertilizers. Some of the crops like rice were water intensive and required intensive irrigation facility. Okay. All these were actually costly. Costly in the sense, for a farmer, there was barely any cost. Now the farmer had to bear this cost, which meant that the farmer did not have the money to do all these things. But it was the necessity of the government to ensure that the farmer did this, so that India as a country becomes food secure. So the government decided the only way in which we can have a farmer doing this farming is if we have some sort of a financial system in the rural areas. Okay, the post offices which were there were not quite sufficient to do these activities. The private money lenders, they were probably cheating people. They were not a very organized system. So the government realized that the only way you can have financial access in rural areas is if banks set up their branches in rural areas. So if the government were to go to a private bank and say, can you please set up a branch in rural area? The private bank would say, why would I do that? It is a loss-making endeavor. I am not going to get anything out of that. Those people don't even know what is banking. Why would they come and deposit money with me? So that would be the logic. So the government decided the private is not going to, of their own, go and set up banks in rural areas. The only way it can be done is if the government itself goes and does it. As I told you in an earlier topic, you cannot one day decide to set up a strong bank. Only an existing bank you can make it stronger. So the government could not set up rural banks all of a sudden. What the government could do is take up an existing bank and then create branches for them in rural areas. That is exactly what they did. 14 of the biggest they compensated owners, saying, I'm paying you this money. You don't have an option. You have to sell your bank to us, and we will take over the running of the bank. So that is what was nationalization. So 14 of the biggest banks, to their objective being to get the rural people get access to finance. especially in the context of green revolution. Towards the success of green revolution is what nationalization of banks was done. So this answers the question why. Okay. Next, we have to answer the question, how was nationalization implemented? When I say how, I am not going to explain the mechanism of what was the process of acquiring the ownership. We are going to talk about what happened after nationalization. How did nationalization contribute to green revolution or financial inclusion? So that is what we are going to talk about in the topic of how. So there were certain initiatives taken by the government towards the success of nationalization. So the heading would be initiatives towards success of nationalization. Number one, we'll talk about a scheme called as lead bank scheme. So Rini is asking a question. Before this, how people had access to currency that they spend for their daily use. Rini, before this, what used to happen is that farmers used to work in the farm. They used to get money from their landowners, or they used to sell their products and get the money. They would keep the money in their home in some physical location, and they would use it. Or there was some primitive sort of a banking system available in the base of caste-based money lending that used to happen. Every village used to have one set of family money lenders, or a group of families, or a particular caste who were into money lending. You would find this in every region. There would be one caste of people whose occupation itself is money lending. Okay, who take money, who take deposits from somewhere, or who have money of their own, who give out loans. So whoever required money, loan money, would go to these money lenders and they would get the money. Okay. Deposits was not much of a concept there, because the people, if they had money, they wouldn't trust it to just give it to someone else. So that was how it was. Okay. So that was how the money usage was in the previous time. And it is also true that even after independence, in a lot of places in India, we were following a sort of barter system where a farmer or a laborer would work in a farm. The landowner would provide food, would provide clothing and all those in different occasions to that entire family, would take care of the children. And for taking care of that family, the family would forever work for that landowner. So there was no requirement for money as such. Whatever was required, the landowner would be taking care of them. So they wouldn't be, of course, the labor family there wouldn't be able to have their own sort of fund saying that I want to buy my own new clothes for my children. That wouldn't happen. Whenever they would get clothes from the landowners, that is when they would have. Okay. So this is how it was in the previous period. Okay. Anyway, coming back to lead bank scheme. Lead bank scheme was a scheme. The idea behind the scheme was that uh, people are unaware of how the banking system works. People need to be told how the banking system works. People need to be educated with respect to the banking system. So financial literacy had to be spread. That was one. The second is that in addition to the financial literacy itself, what is a bank? People are not aware. Who is a money lender, who borrows money, who lends money, all those the people are aware of, because conventionally it has been there. Their own friends or their own related people are the ones who are doing all these things. But when you talk about a bank is a complete stranger. The people have absolutely no idea about who is running the bank and what is this, no idea whatsoever. Okay? And it was impossible to imagine that the people would just go and deposit their money in with that some unknown company. What if they close down and they leave? All the money would be lost. So all these were the issues that were there. Plus, it is not one bank that the government nationalized. Government nationalized 14 banks. So it is not that only in one village or in one district only one particular bank would be there. There would be government owned multiple banks. So in the same area, you might have an SBI, you might have a Punjab National Bank, you might have a Canara Bank, and a series of such banks. So there had to be a coordination between all these banks. So lead bank scheme ensured all these things. First step, greater coordination between various banks. In terms of their banking activities, what are the kind of lending that they could give, what are the kind of deposits that they could take, all these decisions, how to spread financial literacy, all these, greater coordination among banks. That is what lead bank schemes, one of the objectives. Other objectives are bring about intensive development of a region. So the idea here is that if in a particular region, and this region could be a few villages, a district, an entire district, whatever is the designated region, in that region, from among the so many banks that are there, one bank is chosen as the leader. One bank will be given the designation of being the lead bank. And this lead bank would be different in different areas. In one particular region, there is PNB, there is SBA, there is Canara, all these banks. PNB might be appointed as the lead bank. In another region with the same set of banks, SBA may be appointed as the lead bank. So it is not that the same bank will be the lead bank everywhere. There is no superior position. It is not that one bank will regulate the other banks. It's like a class leader concept. You have among the class, there is a class representative. One person who will represent the requirements of the class. That person is not superior to anyone else in the class. It is just a representative sort of position. So this lead bank is like a class leader or a leader among the banking system. Okay, so bring about intensive development. So it is almost like adopting a particular region for intensive development. This bank is responsible for that particular area. Okay, responsible for intensive development. Then financial literacy, spreading financial literacy is another objective. These were the objectives of lead bank scheme. It was said it was somewhere around the period of 1969 that we have the lead bank scheme. One unique feature about lead bank scheme is that over a period of time, they introduced another concept called as service area approach. Okay. SAA. So what is service area approach? Why do we talk about it? Is because, see, you cannot have an approach of one size fits all, in the sense one particular plan worked in a particular area for a particular lead bank. It doesn't mean that that approach will work everywhere. So each area requires its own unique plan for succeeding in that particular area. What kind of loans to give, what kind of development to plan, and all this. That particular approach is called a service area approach. Each lead bank was designated with the role of coming up with their own service area approach for the development of that region. So this is what is lead bank scheme. Number two, we have something called as differential rate of interest scheme. Differential rate of interest scheme around the period of 1970. So even if the banks are set up, if the rate of interest at which they are giving out loans is high, it may prevent a lot of low income people from accessing loans. And the government wanted to include even the low income people in the process of development. And they said, for the purpose of some productive activity, not for consumption purposes, for doing some sort of a business activity, for the purpose of productive activity, for productive activity, this is very, very important. Loans could be given at low rates, cheaper rates, as low as even today, as low as 4%. Loans could be given at 4% for people in the low income category. So the people need to go and show proof that they are in the low income category. They have to show proof that they are going to do productive activity. Then the bank may give them a loan at 4%. In the last topic, we saw that there is a cap on what is the lowest rate at which loans can be given, base rate and all those names that we saw, MCLR and all those. This is an exception to that. It is lesser than the MCLR or the external benchmark lending rate. Why? As a special case for productive activity for people in the low income category. What is low income category? That will be well defined by the Reserve Bank of India from time to time. How much of annual income is considered as low income category? So that is differential rate of interest scheme. The third one, and a very, very important scheme even today, is priority sector lending. PSL. So around the period of 1970-71, around that period is when the scheme was launched. Certain sectors in India were identified as priority sectors, and it was decided that 40 percentage of credit given, 40 percentage of what we call as ANBC. AN stands for Adjusted Net Bank Credit. In other words, this refers to loans given by a bank. Adjusted net bank credit means loans given by a bank, as simple as that. You don't have to go any further. In the textbooks and places, you will find A and B, C. That's why I'm simplifying it for you. 40 percentage of the loans given by a bank should be towards priority sectors. What are priority sectors? You have agriculture as a priority sector. Think logically, you will be able to answer on your own. Agriculture as a priority sector. Medium, small, and micro enterprises is a priority sector. Education is a priority sector. Housing is a priority sector. The roads and railways, all those are priority sectors which we'll put under the heading of social infrastructure. Even in those days, although we were not very open as an economy, we were still trying to promote our exports. So export credit is a priority sector. We have more recent addition, sustainable energy, or sorry, renewable energy is the appropriate term. Renewable energy. Anything towards renewable energy. And then we have another segment called as others, where there is a list. It is an exhaustive list of items which the RBI has in their website. You cannot mention all of those, which is why it is given under the heading called as others. Now, healthcare is a question that someone has typed in healthcare, Shivapriya. Now, think of it. You are going towards education. You are asking for a loan for education. You go to a bank, say, I'm going to study. Can you give me a loan? They might give. You before you get admitted in the hospital, you say, I'm going to get admitted in the hospital. Give me a loan. Generally, not. Okay. But building of hospitals, that would be something that would require some money. So that will come under the heading of social infrastructure. Building of hospitals, even building of schools and all those will be social infrastructure. So health infrastructure wise, it is covered. Health wise, it is covered. All right. So now coming to, these are the priority sectors in India right now. And they say 40% of the loans given by a bank not the money that is coming in. In the last chapter, we learned about something called as NDTL, net demand and time liabilities. Liabilities are money coming into a bank. So when we spoke about CRR SLR, we said it as a percentage of deposit coming in. Here we are talking about it as a percentage of the loan going out. If they give out a loan of 100 rupees in a particular year, they have to ensure that 40 rupees of that should be towards these sectors. And there are sub targets also. What are the sub targets? Of the 40 percentage, 18% should be towards agriculture, 7.5% should be towards MSME, which means 25.5 is taken away out of the 40, which means only 14.5% is left towards all the other sectors put together. Remember, it is not 18% of 40% amount. That 18% itself is a part of that 40. 18 plus 7.5 is 25.5. The remaining is only 15.5, which means 18% of A and BC should be given as loan towards agriculture. 7.5% of the, when I say A and BC, of the total loans, of the loans given. 7.5% of loans given should be towards MSME. And these 25.5% should be considered as part of this 40%. That is what it means. Okay. In other words, whatever based on whatever I taught you today, 18 percentage points out of the 40%, 18 percentage points should be spent towards agriculture, 7.5 percentage points should be spent towards MSME. This is how you avoid the confusion. When you say 18% of 40%, you will say 18 into 40 by 100. And you will get a percentage. That percentage is what you will take out of the total. That is not the case. Out of the 40 percentage points that are there, 18 percentage points should be for agri. Okay, I hope this is clear. Okay, there is another classification. In addition to these, there is also another classification saying out of the 40 percentage, 10 percentage points, which means 30 aside, 10 percentage points should be towards loans towards weaker section. A weaker section is something you will not find anywhere here. Why? Because this 10% is something that you have to ensure that the loans that you give towards agri, MSME, education, housing, social infra, export, renewable energy, and others, all of that put together, if they have given a loan to 100 people, let's say, in terms of amount, they have given, let's say, 40 rupees as loan. They have to ensure that 10 rupees out of that should be towards the weaker section. That the weaker section could be someone from agriculture. So if you say a loan of some rupees has been given to agriculture sector and that person happens to be from the weaker section, then it will cover the agriculture target as well as weaker section target. Now, what is weaker section is again something that the RBI has defined extensively, saying people whose income is like this, certain gender-based classification is there, certain capability-based classification is there. That is how the term weaker section is defined in the RBI website. Okay. I hope this is clear. Now, just giving a little more detail about this, this 40% target is something that is applicable to all Indian banks, whether it is public sector banks or private banks. It is applicable to everyone. It is applicable to foreign banks also, but there is a small catch. For foreign banks, if they have 20 or more branches, it is applicable exactly like how it is applicable to Indian banks. But if they have less than 20 branches, then it may not be very possible for them to meet a lot of these agriculture targets and MSME targets and all those, because their presence in rural areas is very, very limited. So what they have said is that foreign banks with less than 20 branches, they only have an overall target of 40%. They do not have to worry about meeting the sub targets. They do not have to worry about meeting the sub targets. Sub targets here being 18, 7.5 and all this. That is not there for foreign banks with branches less than 20. Okay. So that is priority sector lending. Any questions on this you can ask. I'll wait for questions on any topic that we have learned so far. Just give me, I'm going off on the video, but you can ask me the question. I'm right here. Okay, if you have any questions, you can ask me. You don't have to force yourself to ask a question. If you have, you can. Otherwise, we can move. Okay, 18% of 40% confused. Let us say a bank is giving out a loan of total loan of rupees 100. Okay. Of this, agriculture should get definitely should get rupees 18 minimum as loan. MSME should get a minimum of rupees 7.5 as loan. Okay. The other areas put together, they may or may not get, but overall, cumulatively, when they have given out a loan, rupees 40 out of rupees 100 should be towards priority sectors, which means 18 plus 7.5, 25.5 is already done. The remaining 14.5 rupees should be given in some other place like this. Or nowhere there, they can give it in Agri and MSME itself also, no problem. But rupees 40 given as loan should be towards priority sector. So if you look at it, 18 percentage, 18 rupees out of 100 means what? 18 percentage. 18 percentage of the loan given should be towards agriculture. 7.5 percentage of the loan should be given should be given towards MSME, and they have to ensure that overall 40 percentage of loan given should be towards priority sectors. That is one side. On the other hand, they said there are some people who are considered to be weaker. That weaker section could be a person in agri, could be a person in MSME, and could be a person in any other category here. Okay. Out of the 40 rupees that is given as loan, rupees 10 should have been towards weaker section. Maybe the entire 10 rupees is given to agriculture, 18 rupees is given as loan. Let's say 10 rupees is given to a person who's in the weaker section. Good enough. No problem. Then no need to worry about that anymore. But the idea is that 10 percentage of the total loans given should be towards weaker section and should be a part of priority sector. Okay. I hope Ashwin, is your doubt clear? No, 10 percentage of the total loan given should be towards weaker section, and that should be a part of weak priority sector also. The funny thing is, a lot of the doubts that come up in class is not with respect to economics, it's with respect to mathematics, with percentages and this is a percentage of that and all this. It's very interesting. Anyway, moving on now. So this is what these were the various steps, initiatives taken towards nationalization of banks in India. Now, nationalization, was it a success or not? What do you think? Was nationalization of banks a success? People on video, you can just give me a thumbs up if you think it's a success. Don't be afraid to take a stand. It is okay. One person says it's a success. Sri Lakshmi was in a hurry and said it's not a success. Rini says it's a success. Shiva Priya says it's a success. Sri Lakshmi, do you want to reconsider? Don't tell me later I didn't give you an opportunity. Okay, Vamshi, so you have some company. Vamshi says no, it is not a success. Jawahar, I like your confidence. Jawahar said definitely a success. Has nationalization been a success? Okay, was nationalization, okay, this is W. Was nationalization a success? The question. I've got varied answers. Two people have said no, but predominantly people have said yes. I guess the assumption like trickle down theory was a failure. Okay. Um, Now, Sri Lakshmi, I don't understand the rationalization that you're using there because trickle down theory was a failure, and that meant that the previous 5-year plans was a failure. It is because of that failure, as a result of that failure of trickle down theory, that your nationalization had to be implemented in the first place later. So I don't understand the correlation you're trying to bring about in trickle down and nationalization. The trickle down was expected during the 60s, and the second and third 5-year plans were implemented. Whereas nationalization was done at the end of the 60s when that failed. So just think about that link up again. I guess okay. So that was the answer. So my question is, to answer the question, was nationalization a success? We need to answer another question. Why was nationalization brought in? I said primarily towards green revolution, right? Primarily towards green revolution. So this leads us to another question. Was green revolution a success? Yeah. So go on. Sri Lakshmi, thumbs up, thumbs down. Green revolution a success or not? Typing. Oh, you're typing. Okay. You don't want to make a statement in front of everyone. Jawahar, what about you? You are a very confident person. No, you are also not giving me an answer this time. Okay. Oh yeah. Just give me a second. Um, okay, there is one point which I don't know the name of this person, 208825. An interesting point, but I'll not read it out because you have not mentioned your name. That is the punishment for you. Mageshwar said green revolution is a success. Rini says, okay, banks spreading to rural area, that was a success. Okay, and a lot Mageshwar, Akash, Shivapriya, they all say it's a success. Sri Lakshmi says it happened only in a few states. Green revolution happened only in a few states. Okay, that is not an answer to the question whether it is a success or not. That is a statement of a fact. Success says Gunal. Maheshwar says India became self-reliant in agriculture. Gobi Rajagan says green revolution was a success. Sri Lakshmi says it was not implemented in southern states effectively. Success at that point of time, says Rini, in sense that it achieved its goal of making India self-sufficient in food safety. So it's not a success because it was not implemented all says. Okay, now we cannot we cannot count the performance or the success of a past scheme looking using today's lens. We have to look at it from the realities of that time. First of all, to understand whether green revolution was a success or not, we need to ask another question. Why was green revolution necessary in the first place? Green revolution was necessary because India was not self-sufficient with respect to food production, food grain production. We were reliant on other countries. Okay, did India become self-sufficient with respect to food? The answer is yes. India became self-sufficient with respect to food. Not just self-sufficient, India became a net exporter of food grains. Okay, that is where the concept of minimum support price and all those came. Your FCI godowns, all those came and started playing a big role. But the Green Revolution was a success. Okay, Green Revolution, without a question, was a success because it met its objective. What was its objective? To increase productivity in agriculture, to make India self-sufficient with respect to food. Today, if we look back and see, there have been some drawbacks because of Green Revolution. Overutilization of fertilizers, over exploitation of the soil, excess use of water, wastage of water, destruction of the conventional methods of farming, change in the diet patterns of the people. Now, if more of a particular crop is produced, then people also will start consuming more of it. In the previous era, think of people from the south, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and all those, you would have found a lot of millets and all those ragi, bajra, all those being a part of the food. But now you hardly find that. It is still there. In Karnataka, I see that people consume a lot of that. But in Tamil Nadu, that is restricted to very less villages where they still continue consuming it. Predominantly, rice and wheat have taken over the consumption patterns of the people. All those are downsides. Environmental impacts that would be there. All that is there. But every activity that is done has some negatives. For example, if the objective of a particular scheme is to lay roads, and the road is laid, it's in very good condition, it connects two places. Will you call that scheme a failure because they had to cut down a couple of trees? So you have to look at it from the perspective of its objective. You cannot just bring in other aspects to judge a particular scheme. From that perspective, Green Revolution was definitely a success. No question about it. It had a lot of issues, but the objective was met. So Green Revolution is a success. What is the objective of nationalization? To make Green Revolution a success, to provide financial access to the rural people. So if Green Revolution is a success, automatically nationalization also has to be a success. Okay. So it doesn't matter how many states it was implemented in, even through implementation in less number of states, if our food security was ensured, good enough, right? Because that original objective was met. Also, you say Green Revolution was implemented in only a few states, but it doesn't mean that the banks went to rural areas only in few states. Today, if you look at it, every rural village in India has access to bank somewhere or the other. There is a bank in an accessible distance. Maybe they have to travel say 20 or 30 kilometers, but within that region, within that distance, there is a bank available, which was not the case earlier. People didn't know what was the banking system. Now they know. Earlier, only money lenders were there. Today also money lenders are there, but there is an alternative called as banking, and the banking is spreading. Even as we speak, even today, the banking is spreading to a greater extent in rural areas. So nationalization, the only objective was not Green Revolution. Green Revolution had to be a success, but it is not only the Green Revolution which was relevant at that time. In future, in addition to Green Revolution, if further we have to develop into an industrial sort of an economy, there is a requirement for rural access. Another objective we can say of nationalization is, we can say rural access to banking system. Financial knowledge to the people in the rural area. In all these senses, nationalization was a success. But nationalization had a drawback too. So what we have to do right now is we'll look at the positives and negatives of nationalization. Do you guys want a short break? Only one class today. Do you guys want a break or shall I continue? The people on the video are not responding. People on the chat will continue, says Karan. Okay, so no one. Okay, there is only one person who says break. The general perception is, or the general opinion is that you don't need a break, I think. Okay, we'll proceed then. So the one who wants a break, you can quickly go take a break for whatever reason you are asking a break and come back. You would not have covered anything significant. No concept. I'm not going to teach any concept. It is just some points that I'll be writing. So if you have gone on a break, I'll show you the points again. So we'll do an analysis of nationalization. We'll look at the positives of nationalization or the achievements of nationalization. We'll look at the issues with the banking sector, even after nationalization also. Positives of nationalization. Remember, we are not analyzing the merits and demerits of Green Revolution. That is not the objective. Green Revolution was the immediate requirement for nationalization of banks. But Green Revolution was not the only reason why banks were nationalized. Okay, there were a lot of structural changes that were required with respect to banking. That is when nationalization was done. So you cannot just mention all the negatives of Green Revolution as a negative of nationalization. Those are two different things. Okay. So positives of nationalization. Number one, rural penetration of banking system, which means what? More banks in rural areas. Now, obviously, the bank is there, which means that digital literacy also has, sorry, financial literacy also has to be spread. So, spread of financial literacy. Think of it, if nationalization wasn't there then, hadn't happened then, and nationalization hadn't happened at all, if rural penetration of banks had not happened, today, whatever you call as big successes like direct benefit transfer, or Jan Dhan Yojana, all these would never have been possible. Today, why are we able to transfer money directly into a farmer's, into a poor person's account? Because once upon a time, they made sure that the banks are available in rural areas and people know what is a banking system. If that was not there, today's major schemes would not have been a possibility at all. Government is giving a loan to farmers at cheap rates. Why is that possible? Because of access to banking system. Government is giving subsidy directly into the hands of the people. PM Kalyan Yojana, any or crop insurance yojanas and all those. Why is that possible? Because there is access to banking system. So spread of financial literacy is another positive that came out of it. Then increase in employment opportunities. Now think of what we say as great opportunity for us today. For example, everyone here who's in attending the class today, you think of civil services as your primary job, right? That you're targeting. That is why you are here. So similarly, during the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, people thought the highest possible job that they could get was a bank job. If they get a bank job, their life is set. Even today, there are a lot of people who think that way. In fact, there might be people sitting here in class who might be thinking, if civil service doesn't happen as a backup, I'll try to get a bank job because that will also provide some level of safety for you. The difference is at that time, that was their primary objective. Today, it is only a backup plan for you, a bank job. But that is how much of an opportunity that it was, a bank job. That is the kind of opportunity that is provided. Okay. Resource mobilization led to resource mobilization in rural areas. Now, what do we mean by resource mobilization? The resource, the money resource, which was previously kept idle in the houses of these people. Previously, Rini asked a question, right? What were people doing for money previously? What were people doing with their money previously? They were just keeping it as cash inside their home. Or people were not even wanting cash. They were wanting things in kind because they didn't know where to keep the money, what to do with it. Now that there is an avenue for them to use the money or put the money somewhere and gain some interest out of it, now they are thinking, oh, well, we need not go and get only food from our owners, from our whoever is providing us work. We can actually ask for a wage. We can ask for money because there is something that we can do with money. Okay? Instead of keeping the money at home, we can put it in a bank where there is safety guaranteed. So what is happening? Money which was idle somewhere is getting mobilized, is moving to the banking system. And we know, we already saw from the banking system, when money comes into a banking system, invariably the bank would give it out as a loan to someone else. So previously, there was no money available for borrowing for the businesses. Now the banks have more money to borrow in the banking system because more money is getting deposited. So resource mobilization in rural areas leads to more developmental activities, growth activities happening in rural as well as urban areas. Okay, so that is what we refer to as resource mobilization in rural areas. Okay, so these are some positives of nationalization. These are some positives of nationalization. Okay. But there were some negatives to nationalization also, but we will not learn it as negatives of nationalization alone. We learn it in the context of 1991. Okay? 1991. So 1969, one nationalization happened. 1980, another nationalization happened. There is nothing much to learn about the 1980 nationalization specifically. So we say after the nationalization, 1991 is the next major event. when the LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization happened. As a result of that, at that time, the banks had to be liberalized. Private banks had to be allowed to come into the banking system. Global banks were now going to come into the Indian economy. In the context of that, what was the situation of the Indian banking system? What were the issues with the banking system? So we'll talk about that. Issues in banking system in the backdrop of LPG. In the backdrop of LPG 1991. What is LPG? Liquefied petroleum, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So, what were the issues? So, some of the issues were a result of nationalization. Some of the issues were in spite of nationalization, some of the old issues were not addressed. Okay. So, nationalization solved some issues but gave birth to some new issues also. So, what are the issues that were there? We said rural penetration of banks, right? A lot of loss making branches. This was the reason why private wouldn't open rural branches. Why rural branches were not very profit making. Number two, high levels of unrepaid loans. Someone was mentioning earlier that a lot of loans would be taken and would not be repaid. Yes, especially with respect to schemes like priority sector lending and all those loans given to certain areas, it were risky. In India, agricultural loans are risky because they are monsoon dependent. So high levels of unrepaid loans. Not just that, it is that at that time, no, it is for a specific reason that I am not using the word NPA here. I am not using NPA. I did not say high levels of NPA. I'm saying high levels of unrepaid loans. Why? Because there was no proper classification of loans into performing assets and non-performing assets. There was no proper classification of loans, classification of assets based on performance. There was no recovery mechanism. How to recover the money? There was no clear recovery mechanism at that time. And because they are now government owned, these banks were not having profit motive, which made them less accountable. Accountability was low. And when accountability is low, what happens? They start thinking, the bank staff thinking that they are the ones who are being served and that the people who are depositing money are their servants. So very poor customer attitude. Even today, you go to a public sector bank, you go to a private sector bank, you will find that the bank staff, you have to fear to talk to a bank staff in a public sector bank because you are afraid that they might yell at you for not bringing a pen, for asking a doubt. If you don't know how to fill a form, you ask them, they look at you and say, have you been to school? These are the kind of questions that they ask. So you are always afraid to ask. Whereas if you go stand there in a private bank, in general, you go stand there in a private bank not knowing what to do, someone will come to you and ask, what is it that may help you with something? Okay? That tends to happen. This sort of a behavioral differences are there with respect, even today, it is there uh, with respect to public and private sector banks, how they deal with customers. So these are some of the issues. Of course, because it is government owned, there is going to be political interference, political influences, corruption to some extent. All those are there. Lack of technology, it is not with respect to nationalization. In general, India was slow to adopt. So lack of technology, we were still on pen and paper. in general, very slow services. Services were slow to forthcome. These were some issues in the banking system in the backdrop of 1991, in the backdrop of LPG. So because these issues were there, the government appointed a committee in 1991 under the chairmanship of a person called as Narasimhan. We call this as Narasimhan Committee Recommendations towards financial sector reforms. Towards financial sector reforms. Mageshwar, your point is correct. People have a fear. We'll discuss that a little later. I'll just finish talking about this. Or, yeah, I'm in a new topic. I can talk. So, Mageshwar is talking about people's fear towards moving towards the digital economy. It is there, but it is lesser than what it was previously. More people use Paytm and your Google Pay now than they were using earlier. More people use debit cards and credit cards now than people were using earlier. So people are moving. The progress is slow, but people are moving. And since people are moving, more and more stores are also keeping your Google Pay. It is very surprising to find that a roadside vendor, a tender coconut vendor, they are all having Google Pay accounts, which means what? They are having their accounts themselves is digital in nature. And they're immediately getting a message on their phone saying this much amount has been credited to your account, which means that transactions are becoming safer, transactions are becoming quicker, all these are there. But as we have seen with everything, we said green revolution is a success, but it has its failures. Bank nationalization is a success, but it has its failures. Similarly, digitization of banking is also good, or digitization of financial transactions is also good, but it has its issues. People who are not careful with their passwords, with their accounts, they may lose huge amounts of money. Earlier, you would lose only the money which you are careless about, which you might keep somewhere and forget about it. That is what you may lose. Sometimes you take something out of your pocket, money falls out, that is all that you lose. Now your entire money will be wiped out if you have given your password to someone, entire money is lost. So those sort of issues are there. Of course, there are issues with respect to everything. There is a positive and a negative side to anything. There is nothing in the world where you will find that it is all good. Okay, that's a very blanket statement. But if you think and think of the philosophy behind it and get into some interactions over a cup of tea, you will probably eventually agree on that point. Anyway, moving on, Narasimhan Committee recommendations, which is called as financial sector reforms. What is meant by financial sector here? We are, see, in today's context, financial sector refers to one, banking system. Second, your share markets where there's a lot of finance happening. Then the insurance sector is financial sector. All these are called as financial sector. But in 1991, in India, financial sector meant banks. The other sectors were not well developed. The share markets had not been set up. SEBI was not set up in 1991. It was only going to be set up at that point of time. Your insurance, LIC was the only major insurance company. So it was all not much of an area. So by financial sector, they meant banks. Okay. So Narasimhan Committee recommendations. What were the recommendations? Number one, reduce CRR, SLR. Okay. Reduce CRR, SLR. Now, what was the issue? The CRR, SLR, what we learned in the previous class, is the reserve that is kept by the banking system before of the deposits that came in. Let us say 100 rupees comes in as deposits. We have a condition that 40% of that should be towards priority sector lending, which means a bank has only 60 rupees left with them. If they give out a loan of 100, 40 has to be towards priority sector lending, which means only 60 rupees is available for them to give out as a loan. Now, this priority sector loan that they give is a little risky because it may not come back to them. Okay? And because of the issues that we said earlier, accountability being low and a lot of unrepaid loans, what the government felt was that, or the RBI felt was that, more money needs to be kept as a reserve. In fact, there was a time when the CRR SLR together was as high as 45 percentage. Today, I told you it is around 22 percentage or so. So double the amount, which means 100 rupees is deposited in a bank, 45 rupees has to be kept as reserve, which means they only have 55 rupees to give us loan. Out of the 55 rupees they give us loan, 40 percentage should be towards PSL, which means around 22 rupees should be towards PSL, priority sector lending, which means only 33 rupees is available out of 100 rupees which comes into a banking system. Only 33 rupees is available for the banks to give out loan according to their own wish. And they have to make their most of their profit from the 33 rupees. And because only less amount was available to make a lot of profit, they'll have to give this loan at high interest rates. Okay. Now, who's the one borrowing? It is the businesses which borrow money from the bank. When the businesses are borrowing at high interest rates, normal businesses which make normal profit wouldn't borrow money at high interest rates because it may not be profitable for them. So when people borrow, when businesses borrow money at high interest rates, it's mostly businesses which fetch a lot of returns. Business which makes a lot of profit, which has a potential of making a lot of profit, only they'll borrow at high interest rates. But when a business is a potential of getting high profits, they also have a potential of making high losses, which are what we call as risky businesses. So even these 33 rupees that is available were risky loans. They were risky in nature. Okay. So these loans, PSL loans, were risky by default because they were given to areas like agriculture where there is no guarantee of repayment. Plus other loans which banks were giving themselves were risky, which meant that overall risk was high, which validated the fact that the CRR SLR was very high. Okay. So it is a question, are they giving risky loans because CRR SLR is high, or is the CRR SLR high because they are giving risky loans? There was no answer to this. That is where Narasimhan committee said, you reduce your CRR SLR, automatically banks will start giving safer loans because they'll be giving loans at lesser interest rates. Yes, in last class we discussed, right? If CRR SLR is increased, the rate of interest of loans will go up. We had discussed that, right? So CRR SLR is so high, rate of interest of loans is high. To reduce the overall rate of interest, to give out safer loans, they said reduce CRR SLR, and it has been reduced. You know that, which was 45 percentage is now only around 22 percentage. That is there. CRR SLR has been reduced. Second, reduce priority sector lending targets in a phased manner from 40 percentage to 10 percentage. But you know that even today, I never told you anything like of this nature while learning about PSL, which means that even today, the priority sector lending is 40 percentage. This is a recommendation which has not been implemented. It was recommended, it was not implemented. Number 3, give more autonomy to banks. What do we mean by autonomy to banks? See, we are not able to go and ask banks a question, public sector banks a question, why are you making loss? Because they'll answer, because we are not under control. Government is asking us to do this. They are asking us to do this, that. We are doing that. So that is why we are not able to make profit. So give more power to the banks, give more autonomy to banks, and you will find that they will start, then we can ask them to take more responsibility for their actions, and we will see if they improve their performance. So give more autonomy to banks and then make them more accountable. Give more autonomy to banks will make them more accountable. Number 4, these banks were not able to do a lot of investment activities and become bigger because they were not getting money. Why? For their entire money needs, they were depending on the government. Government is their owner. Government is not able to put in more money into the banking system because government itself did not have a lot of money. So Narasimhan committee said, allow banks to access capital. Capital means investment money. not the deposits, but investment money to expand the bank, to set up new branches and all those. Allow banks to access capital from share market. The entire share market, which was beginning to open up in the 1991 period, allowed them to access capital from there, which meant that allowed the banks to sell shares. Allowed the banks to sell shares in the share market. Okay. So that is what the fourth point is. Point. Improve customer service. Classify loans based on quality. Loans are assets. Classify assets based on quality. That is where the concept of NPA and all those started being used in India because of this recommendation. So this recommendation was to a certain extent valid, but even today the public sector banks are not did not have a lot of autonomy. Allow banks to actually share from capital market. It was eventually allowed. Improve customer service. Questionable. Classify assets based on quality. It is there. Create recovery mechanisms. So it is there. Recovery mechanisms are there. Your concept of debt recovery tribunals. Debt recovery tribunals are a result of these Narasimhan Committee recommendations. And they said introduce banking norms like capital adequacy ratio. If you go back and look at the index, I've written something called as international banking norms, and under it I've written something called capital adequacy ratio. They said introduce banking norms like capital adequacy ratio. It was also done. So these were some recommendations of Narasimhan Committee. So this was in 1991. So banking sector tried to, okay, one more very important point. I forgot to mention that. Sorry. It is very important. No more privatization of banks. Sorry, no more nationalization. Sorry, no more nationalization of banks. Because LPG privatization was going to be done. For privatization to succeed, the private should get a feeling that the government will not come and one day suddenly take over. It is like the private puts in all the effort. You all know that initial investment, initial period is the toughest for any business to succeed. So the business takes the risk, they put in all the effort, and then they grow into a substantial business. And just when they feel that, okay, we'll reap the benefits of this business, the government comes and takes over the business. Okay, so that, which is a disincentive. Now the private will feel, what is the point of doing all this? Ultimately, one day government will come and take over the business. Right? So no more nationalization of banks. That there has to be a declaration made to that effect, and it has happened till now. After 1980, not a single bank has been nationalized till date. Okay, so that is see, nationalization is different. Rescuing a bank when it is in trouble is different. Take a look at Lakshmi Vilas Bank and what the RBI is doing. Even that the RBI is what is doing, not the government. RBI being the regulator, it can do things. The government is not doing anything there. But if required, because bank is involving a lot of public money, if the government feels that it needs to interfere and help rescue the bank by taking over the bank, it may. But that is only an exceptional measure. Akash, CAR, I have written in the index, it stands for capital adequacy ratio. I will explain it later in class. Even now, I specifically mentioned that this is what CAR is. That's all right. Maybe you were busy writing an earlier point. I understand. So this is what is Narasimhan Committee recommendations. In 1995, there was something significant which happened in the world, setting up of World Trade Organization. And also during the period of 1991 to 1995-6, what happened was that a lot of the LPG actually became a success. in the sense that a lot of foreign institutions started coming to India, foreign banks started entering India and becoming competitors to Indian banks. In that context, the government felt that there is one more reform required in the Indian banking system, and they again went to the same person to come up with recommendations. 1998, Narasimhan Committee, another committee was formed in under the chairmanship of Narasimhan. This is what we call as Narasimhan Committee recommendations number 2. So this we'll have to rename it as number 1. In the setup, they didn't know there would be a second, so I wrote it as Narasimhan Committee recommendations. But once they set up the second one, we know that there was one in the past, so that will be 1. This will be 2. And by this time, the financial sector had grown significantly, so it is not called as financial sector reforms. It is called as banking sector reforms, specifically banking sector. Now, what are the recommendations that were there? Number 1, it is in the context of global companies, global banks coming into India, which means that Indian banks should be adequate enough to compete with the big banks of foreign countries. Remember, who are these foreign banks who are coming in? Banks which are big enough in their own country, they don't know what to do with the extra money, so they're coming to India and investing and setting up banks. So India has to compete with them. India has to have really, really strong banks. Yes, like Mageshwar says, Bank of America or Royal Bank of Scotland, a lot of banks, Standard Chartered Bank, all these banks which are coming to India, HSBC, all these banks. Okay, they are coming to India and they are setting up, means that Indian banks have to be strong enough to compete. And this is for the third time that I'm telling you in today's class, strong banks cannot be created one fine day. It, banks have to be set up and they have to turn strong, or else you need a strong bank. You need to merge a few strong banks to become a really strong bank, like how the 3 presidency banks were merged to form the Imperial Bank of India. Here also, the suggestion was merger of strong and strong banks to form international sized banks. Please note that Narasimhan Committee was against the concept of strong and weak bank merger. Now, why am I telling this? Because what is happening in the economy currently is a merger of strong and weak banks, where the intention is to rescue the weak bank. Okay, what it does is that it puts the pressure of the weak bank on the strong bank and reduces the strength of the strong bank. But what Narasimhan Committee envisaged was, you merge 2 strong banks. You take a bank like SBI, for example. Even after SBI was merged with Bharatiya Mahila Bank and all the associate banks, now the associate banks don't exist anymore. They are merged with SBI itself. Even after that, SBI would be probably in the 50th position in top 50 banks of the world. That is not any position for an international level bank to be in. You have to be in the top 4 or 5 to actually be considered as a proper international bank, which is not the case with SBI. And SBI is the biggest bank in India, not just biggest public sector bank. It is this biggest bank in India, and it occupies the 50th or 51st position in the global banking system. Which means that all these mergers that India is doing is not making our banking system stronger, not making the existing banks stronger. The idea was to merge strong and strong banks to become competitors. Standard Chartered Bank comes to India and sets up a bank. We'll go to their place and set up a bank as a competition to them. That was the idea. It never met. It has not materialized so far. As part of that idea, Narasimhan Committee also suggested a 3-tier banking structure. What is a 3-tier banking structure? It said on the top, we'll have some really big international size banks, 2 to 3 international size banks. And under this, we'll have, not under this as in governance wise, as a second tier, we'll have about Yeah, this is not the right size. We'll have a few national sized, about 8 to 10 national sized banks. Okay? 8 to 10 national level banks. What we have today is mostly national sized banks. SBI is slightly bigger than what is required for a nationalized size bank, but it is not on the size of an international bank. So 8 to 10 national level banks and many, as many as required of regional banks, which cater to specific regions, let's say South India alone, or maybe Tamil Nadu alone, such banks. Now, in fact, India today does have a three-tier banking structure, but India's three-tier banking structure is weird. We have about 15 to 20 national-sized banks. We have many regional banks, and we also have many sub-regional banks. Sub-regional banks. So when I say regional bank, I'm referring to banks which cater to an entire South India or Central India or East India, or at least 2-3 states together. That is what we mean by regional bank. Today, we have regional banks. Let's say a bank like say Lakshmi Vilas Bank or Dhanalakshmi Bank, and all those predominantly caters to some regions alone, say South India alone. In addition, we also have banks which cater only to particular state. Previously, only to a particular district also that was there. For example, you take Kerala's example, there was something called as North Malabar Grameen Bank, which means it is there only in the Malabar region. Malabar itself is the northern part of Kerala, and there itself the northern part of that. So there were different banks for different very minor regions. Now it has all been merged into one Malabar Grameen Bank, or that is there, or yeah, various Grameen banks that are there. Correct. So those are catering to the sub-regionals. Cooperative societies that are the cooperative banks that are there, they are cater to sub-regional. So these are the three tiers that we have now. But what Narasimhan Committee envisioned was these three structures. So today's conversation, we are talking about a 4-tier banking structure instead of a 3-tier banking structure. But Narasimhan Committee, when he gave the recommendations, his recommendation was 3-tier. Let's not get confused with what was Narasimhan Committee's recommendation and what is the current recommendation. I'm focusing on this so much because in your textbook, it is given as 4-tier as Narasimhan Committee recommendations, which is wrong. It's the mistake in the textbook. Then third one, the next question that comes is, what about weak banks? You are saying weak and strong banks should not be merged. What should we do with the weak banks? Narasimhan Committee said, put them under narrow banking. Narrow banking for weak banks. Now, what is meant by narrow banking? Restricting the banking activities of a bank, where if they are not performing poorly, identify the reasons, let the regulator go and monitor the activities of a bank and try to find out or guide them to get to a profitable zone, and then once again give them the freedom. For example, in India, we have something called as prompt corrective action. For example, now we have Lakshmi Vilas Bank, which has not performed well, which is performing poorly. RBI goes and says, I am going to impose some moratorium on you. I am going to impose prompt corrective action on you, PCA, where I am going to monitor every activity of yours. Who are you giving a loan to? What kind of loans you can give? Who can you give a promotion to? Who can get a salary raise? Which means you are restricting the functioning of the bank, narrowing the functioning of the bank. That is what is called as narrow banking. Narrow the functioning of the bank till the bank comes out of trouble, and then leave the bank, give freedom to the bank to go and do their business freely. That is narrow banking. So we will talk about prompt corrective action in greater detail towards the end of the class. Yes Bank is also a weak bank, correct? Most of the banks in India, truth be told, are weak banks. Very few banks are strong and healthy. SBI is an example. Punjab National Bank is an example. Private bank wise, ICICI is an example of a strong bank. Your HDFC is an example of a strong bank. Okay. Then 4, increase computerization, or now more than increase, quicken the pace of computerization in banks. So these are some of the recommendations that were there of the Narasimhan committee. Not the entire thing. These were some of the recommendations. I have not covered everything, every recommendation that is there. Of course, there was a comment about capital adequacy ratio, increasing the capital adequacy ratio appropriately, and all those things. These are the important ones that are there. Okay, so this brings us to sort of a pause when it comes to the chronology. So we are at 1998 now. The next major event that we can talk about happened in 2002. That is the implementation of an act called as SARFAESI Act. But we will learn about SARFAESI Act in a different context. Don't get confused. It's an act called SARFAESI Act. Don't write it now. There is an act called as SARFAESI Act, SARFAESI. We will talk about it in the context of non-performing asset. Right here, when in 1991 it spoke about classification of assets, we realized that NPA is going to be a problem in India. 1995, 96, 98, all the NPA was slowly becoming a bit of an issue in India. And in that context, in 2002, SARFAESI Act was implemented. But for that, we first have to learn about non-performing assets. So we'll just take a 2-minute pause. I need a bit of a break for my voice. So we'll take a 2-minute break, and then you guys don't take a break because you didn't want a break. So sit and stare at the screen, whereas I will go take a break and I'll relax because you said no break required for you. But that one person who said give a break, that person alone can take a break. The others, I'll come and check whether you are here. Don't take a break. I'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, let's start. Good. The two video people are still there. Proceeding, we are moving to the next topic under the heading of non-performing assets. So first, let's try to understand what is meant by NPA, the definition of NPA if you want. I'll explain and then I'll give you an oral definition or a dictated definition of it. So every asset, when you call it as an asset, it has a role to perform. It is supposed to give you some sort of a benefit. That is why you are calling it as an asset. Okay? Your car is an asset that you have. Why? Because it is supposed to take you from place to place. It is supposed to give you the comfort of being able to travel at your own time, at your own convenience. You can stop it anywhere you want. All these are the comforts that you or benefits that you expect from a car. Okay? So that is called an asset performing its role. Now imagine having a car where you sit in it, you try to start the car doesn't start at all. And then you have to try for 15 minutes before the car actually starts. And then again, car stops somewhere in a signal, it doesn't start for another 15 minutes. Or the door of the car doesn't open properly. Imagine traveling in a car like that. It is an asset. It doesn't become a liability. It is an asset which is not performing its role properly. Remember, the classification of something into asset and liability is not flexible. If it is performing, it is an asset. If I'm getting gain out of it, if it is an asset. If I'm not getting gain out of it, it is a liability. That is not how it is. Imagine, okay, just a random example about some unrelated individual in your life. You know, some let's say a parent raises their children, pays for their school and college education and all those, with the expectation that one day they'll gain a lot and they'll start and go working and earn income for the family. And that is their expectation. So that is the performance they're expecting. But they realize that what the reality is that the child is 20, the child is 21, 23, 25, 29, 30, 35, still studying for government examinations and sitting at home and not earning anything at all. Do you call that person a liability or do you call that person a non-performing asset? So that is the classification that is there. Okay, I'm talking about some random people. Don't take any personal offense to this. So that is the concept of non-performing asset, where you are supposed to, you have the capability, and at the age of 35, let's say suddenly that person gets the job that the person was after throughout their life. I might be telling my own life story also. Suddenly, the person once again starts performing the role that was expected of the child. So there is always a possibility with an asset that in the case of the car, you take proper maintenance of the car, you repair the car, you service the car can get back to its get back to performing its role. So an asset is not switchable and it doesn't become a liability after a point of time. An asset is always classified as an asset. Either it is performing or it is not performing a role. Liability is completely different. Liability, right from the beginning, we know that it is going to lead to some sort of a loss for us. Typical example for liability is always about loans. You take a loan, you know that one, you have to give back the loan. Second, you have to pay interest on that. Regularly pay interest on that. Okay? That is what is a liability. Similarly, you can think of something. You seek help from a person. Inside your mind, you're always like, I got a help now, but at any given point of time, I may have to repay the favor. I may have to give that person a favor back. That person may come back and ask me for that favor again in some other context. You always have that feeling in your mind. That is a sort of a liability that you have. Okay? So that is what is the classification of asset and liability. It is not a fluid concept. You cannot switch, something cannot switch from being an asset to a liability. That part you have to be very clear. Either it is an asset or it is a liability. And then within that, it is a performing asset or a non-performing asset. Okay? So when we talk about asset in this context, in the context of banking, what is the asset? From a bank's perspective, the asset is the loan given by a bank. Loans given by a bank. Okay? What is the performance that they expect out of this asset? Recovery of principal, and receipt of interest. These are the two performance that they expect out of it. Recovery of principal amount, sorry, PAL, my bad. Recovery of principal amount and receipt of interest amount. That is what they expect as a performance. If either of these don't happen, in the designated time period. There is also something called as a maturity period and a timeline for everything, right? If either of these doesn't happen in the designated time period, we call that asset is not performing its role. This is conceptually. I'm just explaining the concept to you. Now, coming to the context of how RBI defines the non-performing assets, it says that if no repayment, if you can write this down, if no repayment of principal or interest is done on an asset for a continuous period of 90 days, the asset is considered non-performing. "90 days is 3 months. Normally, interest obligations and principals are paid over a period of months. 1 month, second month, third month. First month, no repayment happens. Okay, there is some slip up that has happened. Let's give the person a little more time. Second month, warning, you have to pay. Third month, if they don't pay, it is classified as a non-performing asset. That is the idea. This is the general definition. Okay. Now, within non-performing asset, there might be certain kinds of loans where in 15 days, if they have not repaid the obligation for a period of 15 days, it may be classified as an NPA. There are some loans which are itself, the loan itself is given only for a period of 7 days. So if they delay by a day also, it may be performed as it may be classified as an NPA. So these classifications, whatever I have given you is a generalized classification of NPA, but there might be other sub-definitions of NPAs also, depending on certain kinds of loans. In general definition, if you are writing an examination, this is the definition that you have to go by. In a practical scenario, there may be changes, is what I'm trying to tell you. There is a general scenario, there are rules, and then there are exceptions. Okay. For example, current situation is an exemption. Now, because of the COVID situation, the government has said, even if you don't repay for 90 days, you don't repay for 6 months, it is still not an NPA. Because people have not been earning money, right? So there have been relaxations to this rule currently. Yeah, so that relaxation is what we call as a moratorium. As Rini has rightly pointed out, that relaxation, any change to an existing system or any hold, any sort of a restriction on a regular activity is called a moratorium. The regular activity is the recovery of principal and interest. A hold on that or a limitation on that is what we call as a moratorium. For now, we are not going to recover the principal or the interest. That is the moratorium that we are talking about. There was this huge issue about whether people should be given that moratorium, how long should they be given that in the Supreme Court. So in that context is what this is. Moratorium is a word which is used in many contexts. So a function which was regularly being performed, a halt on that is what is called as a moratorium. It can be used in any context in this case with this meaning. Okay. So that is what is a non-performing asset. The definition of non-performing asset is done. Okay. Now, assets can be classified, as we have just seen, into a performing asset and a non-performing asset. Performing assets are also called by another name. Performing assets are also called as standard assets. Performing assets are also called as standard assets. Now, non-performing assets, similarly, are also called by another name. They are referred to as substandard assets. Non-performing assets are also called as substandard assets. Because standard means they are performing to a expected standard. Substandard means they are not. Okay? But it doesn't end here. In fact, non-performing assets have other subclassifications also. For example, a non-performing asset. When does an asset become a non-performing asset? When there is no repayment for 3 months. Okay? then it becomes a non-performing asset. The moment it becomes a non-performing asset, it also becomes a substandard asset. From the day that it becomes a non-performing asset for 12 months, so first 12 months, it is under the classification of substandard asset. Okay. So after 3 months, a loan is classified as non-performing asset. For the first 12 months of its life as a non-performing asset, it is classified as substandard asset. After 12 months, see, till those 12 months, we are under the expectation that, yes, for now, it is not performing, but anytime soon, it may start performing its role again. Our expectation is that it is just a temporary blip. It will come back and start performing its role properly. But after 12 months, now you are doubtful. You are not very sure whether that will happen because 1 year has elapsed with no gain or no change in the situation. So you classify it as a doubtful asset after 12 months. After 12 months. So till 12 months, it is substandard asset. Beyond 12 months, it's doubtful assets. Both are NPAs. NPAs are classified for their first 12 months as substandard assets and beyond that as doubtful assets. Okay. And then after 12 months, what happens? After 12 months, when it becomes doubtful whether the asset will come back, whether the recovery will happen, the bank forms an internal committee and the bank does an investigation to find out whether the asset will come back. If they feel that if the investigating team finds that yes, it will come back, it is just a matter of time, we will get back the entire asset, then it will continue to remain as a doubtful asset. But if the bank internal committee finds out that the asset is not going to come back, very high chance that the asset will not come back. At least, let's say 10 lakhs was the loan and 2 lakhs was the interest. So the value of the asset is not 10 lakhs, the value of the asset is 12 lakhs because the performance is also included as part of the asset. So 12 lakhs is the value of that asset. Let us say the committee, the bank internal team finds out that only 8 lakhs will come, or only 10 lakhs will come, or only 11 lakhs will come, or maybe 6 lakhs will come, or nothing will come. In either of these cases, the bank committee will make a declaration and say that asset is going to give us a loss. Even if 11 lakhs will come back, it is going to lead to a loss of 1 lakh. As we have seen in the last class, after taking all the bank's expenditures and all those internal expenditures and operational cost and all those into account, after that is what they determine what is going to be the rate at which they give out loans. Which means that this 12 lakh is, this 2 lakh is not a profit for them. This 2 lakh includes the amount of money which they require to take care of their operational cost and all those things. Okay. So this 2 lakh is not profit that they are losing out. This 2 lakh includes money which they are spending on maintaining that 10 lakh, which means that if they don't get back that entire 12 lakhs, they are definitely going to suffer a loss. Even if they don't get 1 lakh rupees, it is considered as a loss, and they'll declare that there is a loss associated with that particular asset. So they'll declare them to be loss assets after investigation. After 12 months, it becomes doubtful asset. But after it becomes a doubtful asset, an investigation is done. And after investigation, if there is a loss associated with that account, with that asset, it will be classified as a lost asset. Remember, loss asset does not mean they have recovered 11 lakhs and 1 lakh is declared as loss. Loss asset is only a classification saying that with this asset, there is a definite loss going to happen. Now, after this, what happens? The bank takes a call. The bank says, should we wait for longer or should we try to recover the money as soon as possible? If they feel that recovering the money now is the best chance, if we wait longer, our loss is only going to become bigger. Then what the bank does is the bank tries to get as much of the money as possible. And the remaining, when the bank realizes that at the moment it cannot get back from the person, the bank feels, why should we carry this in our account book? Because these assets and liabilities, all those should be reported in a book, account book for them, their ledger. It should be reported. And the more the NPA of a bank, the more trouble they are in, the more reserves they have to keep and all those. So they feel we will try to recover as much of the loan as possible. We will try to get the remaining amount also, but we will not carry this as a recoverable in our book. We will declare it to be a loss, and we will take as much of it as possible. So they'll call it as, after that, it becomes a written off asset. The asset gets written off. It is not a type of NPA. Written off asset is not a type of NPA. Why do I say so? Because once it's written off, it is not an asset anymore. NPA is a type of asset. Once you write it off, it is not even an asset anymore. So written off asset is not a type of asset. It just indicates that the bank has recovered as much as is possible and has written off the asset. It is not an asset anymore in the bank's book. They are not expecting anything out of that asset. Now, in written off asset, there are two possibilities. One possibility where bank accepts, bank gives up on the recovery, or a bank where the bank doesn't try to recover anymore. And second one, where the bank continues to try to recover. Bank continues to try to recover. Now, take for example, there is a student who has taken an education loan and is not able to repay because he didn't get a job or she didn't get a job. And there is a business person who did business and is not, the business is not going well right now. So in the first case, the bank manager feels, you know what, already the person is in too much trouble, did education, is not able to get a job. It is not right on our part to go and hound that person. Let's get as much as possible and then declare it as written off. Let us not try to recover it. Let that person go and live their life. Whatever job they get, let us try to live their life. Okay. So where the bank doesn't try to recover it anymore, they say they'll declare we are not going to get it. It is done. But that is a bank's decision. But on the other hand, where they feel that currently the business is not performing well, so currently they are not in a position to give, but sometime in future, they may be, maybe 2 years down the line, they may get back to a good position. At that time, we'll go and recover. So where the bank continues to try to recover, which means that the person who borrowed the money has an obligation to repay the loan. In the first case, let's say the student loan is given, the student doesn't have to repay. If the bank says, okay, go, no problem, you paid whatever you can, no need to come back. The student doesn't have the obligation to repay anymore. But in this particular case, the business always has an obligation. The bank will try to continue to pursue that loan. Okay, so there is a difference within written off asset itself. That is a bank's judgment. It is the bank which decides whether to do it or not. Okay. So now what I have done is I have given a classification of NPAs for you. In the next class, our class is over now, it's 4:30. In the next class, what we'll do, we will take a look at, please remind me, because I'll ask you in the next class, what is it that we are going to do next? So the next topic for us is, how did India get into the NPA crisis? That is the next, that should be the topic next class. How did India get into the NPA crisis? Or you can just mention it as NPAs in India. That is the heading for the next class. NPAs in India. All right. So I'm done with today's class. If you have any questions, you can ask me. If you don't have any questions, you can disconnect and leave. You can reconnect at 5 o'clock for the next class. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for coming on the video, Sri Lakshmi and Jawahar. Welcome, Sri Lakshmi, Ashwin. Welcome, Gunal. Welcome, Shivapriya. Vijay Mallya case is a case of NPA, which has gone through different cases where the bank is still trying to recover it, Vamshi. The bank is still trying to recover that money. Welcome, Vamshi. All right, if you don't have any further questions, then I'll disconnect and leave.